It was a day that started like any other. I was out for a walk when all of a sudden I saw a grown man guzzling a carton of cow's milk. The enthusiasm with which he was greedily pouring it down his gullet all of a sudden made me pause. At what point did devouring copious amounts of secretions from another animal become so normal that grown men on the street would be doing so in a similar manner to which a newborn baby would from their own mother? I felt like Freud had missed a trick. All these years theorizing about the relationships between parents and their children, and in front of me now was a man openly infantilizing himself, weaned off his own mother and weaned onto the nipples of someone else's. Except this mother was from an entirely different species. As I watched this spectacle, I thought about what the social response would be to this same man laid under a cow drinking, shall we say, straight from the source. How most people would find that weird, creepy, and disturbing. Interspecies secretion guzzling would be a phrase that comes to mind. Yet what was the man in front of me doing that was fundamentally different? Nothing. The only actual difference was the milk had been taken from the cow and put in a carton, but it was still interspecies secretion guzzling. So how did we get here?
What can milk do? Let's talk about it.
To find out, we have to look back in time and arrive at the Neolithic Revolution. This is a period of time that started around 10,000 years ago when humans began settling and domesticating animals. Aside from raising animals for meat, there is evidence that early farmers in parts of Europe, Africa, and the Middle East were also using animals' milk. This is evident from depictions in ancient rock art, the discovery of fatty residues on pottery, and the analysis of animal bones, which suggested that females were being kept alive beyond usual slaughtering ages for other purposes, such as milking. There are several reasons why people may have begun drinking milk in these parts of the world. One is that milk was a readily available source of water and hydration in parts of Africa and Middle East where drought was common and water a scarce resource. And in the colder regions of Europe where crops were harder to grow, milk provided a year-round source of nutrition during famines. Although goats, sheep, pigs and horses were also being farmed, cow's milk probably prevailed because cows are more docile and also easier to exploit, and they produce larger quantities of milder tasting milk. But it's important to point out here that just because our ancestors were drinking milk doesn't mean that they were doing so without problems. For one, raw milk can carry a host of bacteria such as E. coli and salmonella, which of course make humans sick and can even be fatal. Milk also contains a sugar called lactose, and we need the enzyme lactase to process it. But all mammals, including humans, actually stop producing this enzyme after weaning from their mother's milk, leading to lactose intolerance. Some researchers think this trait may have evolved to actually prevent adults and children drinking milk that is designed for infants and necessary for the survival of those infants. But we obviously didn't listen to that, and not least when it comes to other species. Our ancestors continue to drink animals' milk even though it would have made them sick because, well, illness is preferable to dying of starvation. After all, desperate times, desperate measures and all that. Eventually, natural selection favored those who got less sick and could tolerate lactose better, leading to a mutation which kept the lactose gene permanently switched on. This lactase-persistent gene spread the most rapidly in Northern Europe, where people were consuming more milk, possibly because of the colder weather, which may have made milk last longer, and possibly because other regions remained more populated by hunter-gatherers, while agriculture dominated Europe and the places that Europeans later colonized, like of course what is now called the United States. But milk consumption was still far from widespread, and it wasn't until thousands of years later that cow's milk became a household staple in the West. In the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution brought about technologies which turned milk from a survival food into a fully fledged industry. These technologies included pasteurization, which is the process of heating milk to kill harmful bacteria, as well as refrigeration, which extended shelf life, and the railway, which allowed food to be transported quickly from the countryside and then into cities. These inventions made milk more accessible and safer to drink for humans, leading to an increased uptake. Then during World War I and II, dairy production ramped up up even more as millions of tons of condensed and powdered milk were sent to the Allied forces. This huge surge in demand prompted farmers to stop diversifying and focus solely on production of dairy instead. This period saw the increasing mechanization of dairy farms from small-scale family-run operations to larger factory-style businesses with milking machines. Cows were selectively bred as well to produce 10 times more milk than they naturally would. But the problem is, after the wars had finished, the supply far outweighed the demand, and farmers found themselves with huge surpluses and yet no buyers. The cheese and butter industries absorbed some of the surplus, but huge quantities of milk still remained. And farmers felt they'd invested way too much time and energy shifting towards large-scale, year-round milk production to simply just stop. So instead of decreasing production, they lobbied the government, who stepped in and bought the surpluses from farmers with taxpayers' money instead. This would be the beginning of a very, let's call it, cozy relationship between the dairy industry and the government, which continues to this day. In addition to buying and storing surplus dairy products in huge warehouses, much of which would ultimately go to waste, the government also helped to market the dairy industry and encourage the public to drink more milk. This included increasing the recommendations for dairy in the official dietary guidelines, including free school milk schemes and overseeing infamous marketing campaigns like Got Milk. In fact, governments helped to establish and gave money to marketing bodies which existed exclusively to promote cow's milk to the public and to sell it to businesses. These included the Dairy Checkoff program in the US and the Milk Marketing Board in the UK, because nothing makes you feel more reassured than governments working with the private sector who have vested interests to push what they are producing onto us as consumers. Although this fact alone should really emphasize a very important part of this, which is the recommendations that we have in place and the marketing behind cow's milk was not established through any rigorous scientific endeavors or because governments in the dairy industry had the best interests of consumers at heart, but because of this massive surplus which existed. This partnership between the dairy industry and the government was essentially one of the most successful marketing campaigns in history because it completely normalized something as unnatural and also as weird as drinking the breast milk of another species, and even made us believe that we need to consume cow's milk to be healthy, which objectively speaking obviously doesn't make any sense considering cows only produce milk to feed their own children. You see, milk is not designed for the human body, and our consumption of it is causing all sorts of major problems in the modern world. Obesity, diabetes, antibiotic resistance, breast, colon, and prostate cancer. These are just some of the associated health issues. It also exacerbates things like food waste, pollution, global warming, biodiversity, and habitat loss, and also feeds corruption. Finally, the dairy industry causes horrific animal suffering, as mothers are forced to undergo a physically and emotionally traumatic cycle of being forcibly impregnated and then having their newborn babies taken from them until their milk production declines and they are then slaughtered. And there is something obviously wrong with an industry that involves humans taking semen from an animal, then penetrating another animal and injecting that semen inside of them so that we can then make them pregnant and then take away their baby, and also that we can drink milk that is then squeezed out of the animal who we penetrated. How is this normal and not considered disturbing and sick? But even with all the inherent issues found within dairy farming, milk is now a part of our everyday lives. And whilst that's not going to change overnight, thankfully there is a simple alternative: milk made from plants. Drinking oat milk, coconut milk, soy milk, or any other alternative is one of the simplest yet most urgent and important switches that we can make to begin addressing these problems and tackling the age-old milk myth. So, to sum up, we began drinking cow's milk out of desperation in times of scarcity and famine. This caused some people to develop a genetic mutation, allowing them to tolerate lactose. The Industrial Revolution capitalized on this and transformed this relatively rare habit into an industry which the government continues to prop up and promote with taxpayer money. And then years upon years of heavy marketing and integration into our social structures have left us with the false belief that human beings are meant to drink cow's milk. But they're not. Milk was actually simply a last resort in times of desperation and survival, and its continued consumption is now harming far more than it's helping. It's time to leave cow's milk for cows because, that's what cow's milk is for, other cows. And aside from removing the overall weirdness of suckling from a different species, no longer consuming dairy, most importantly, means that we leave this cruel and destructive habit in the past where it belongs.